Welcome to episode 45 of the Strength in Words podcast. Today, I am speaking with Jill Loftus, a pediatric occupational therapist, parent coach, educator, and author focused on enabling and empowering children and families. Her experience ranges from working in the schools, homes, clinics, and in the community in New York, San Diego, and currently in Denver. Jill started Honest Occupational Therapy to motivate children, families, and educators to develop the skills they need to perform everyday tasks and be successful. The heart of occupational therapy. Jill, welcome.
Thank you, Ayelet. It's so nice to be here.
So I've asked you on the show today to speak a little bit about the sensory system, sensory processing, and really what that is, and how we can best support sensory development in our infants and toddlers. So first, I'd love to just hear a little bit about you and what brought you into the kind of work that you're doing today.
Sure. So I've been an OT in pediatrics for almost 20 years, and I can't believe that I'm saying that because I don't feel that old. But I always had a passion for children. I love watching them play and talk and engage with. So from my very first days as an OT, that's what I've been doing. I've always worked in pediatrics, and I love working with families. And I also enjoy sharing all this information that we have to offer and just getting it out there, helping families make life a little bit easier in so many different areas. And it's great. And I'm still very passionate about it after all this time.
Oh,
so
you can hear it.
That's how I got here. Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, my major area that I base my work on is the sensory integration theory. And I know it sounds a little bit scary. We're talking about theories and blah, 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 but I'm going to try to make it really easy for you guys to understand and really realize that sensory is truly the foundation. If we looked at development as a pyramid, sensory and the nervous system would be at the bottom of that pyramid, and all those other skills would kind of go up all the way to the top, with just how we get through our day.
Nice. Great way to think about it.
Yeah.
So let's see. Can you give us an overview of some of the basic information about that sensory system and what happens also when it's overloaded?
Yes. So we have been taught from very early on that we have 5 senses. And ironically enough, I was just in a preschool classroom a couple of weeks ago and they were talking about this. And I was like, we should really be teaching them that we have 3 hidden senses. And this is, I think, really so interesting. And to me, these 3 senses are really the true foundation of how our bodies work. And I'm going to share that piece of information with you today. So the first system is called the vestibular system. And it's just a fancy word for how your body experiences movement. So inside our ears, there are these little ear canals, and they have fluid in them, and they move around. It flows back and forth. And then there are these hair cells that dip down in there and they send signals to our brain. So when you're riding in a car, when you're doing a forward roll, when you're sitting in a chair, when you're doing any sort of movement, you're getting signals to your brain about what you're doing. Sometimes those messages can get messed up. They can be hypersensitive. So you might have to move all the time. They might be under-responsive, meaning kids who get like car sick or don't really like having their feet off the ground. And then you have just slow processors. So you can imagine like that information is creeping and then they respond to everything a little bit later than they're supposed to. Mm-hmm. So that's a really important sense to develop. And it's one of the first senses to develop when we're itty bitty. The second sense is called your proprioception system. And again, big fancy word, but all it really means is it's the response of your muscles and joints, your muscles and tendons around your joints. So things like crawling and running and opening and closing doors and using utensils during mealtime and writing with pencils, all of that requires proprioception, or how you're feeling that information come into your body. For children who are hypersensitive to that, they're pushing, they're kind of flitting all around, they're clumsy, they're not noticing what's going on. And then kids who are low in that area are pushing super hard, like they open the door, like, busting in, or they're drawing holes through their paper because their system is low and they think they're doing it properly, but they're not. And the thing with kids is they have no previous understanding of how things should be. This is what they know. This is how they're acting. So we need to pick up on these kinds of red flags or types of behaviors so that we know that we can help them. The last one is kind of new on the scene. It's called interoception, and that's our inner body sense. So kids who have a hard time potty training, kids who maybe never ask for water or food, or kids who are insatiable, need to be drinking water, need to be eating all the time, heart rate, all those inner senses, that's interoception. So again, when you have kids who are really hyper about it, they're unaware. They're just like, they're the ones who are playing all the time and not really checking in with their body. And then you have the ones who are lower, who are kind of like, this is what I need all the time. So these senses truly, to me, are really, really important. And sensory processing, the pure definition of it is how we take in, process, and give an adaptive response to our environment. So 20% of the population has sensory processing disorder. So disorder is kind of a scary word, I think, to a lot of people. I think based on the history of special needs and all of that, it has this negative connotation. With sensory processing disorder means truly a disordering. So the information is coming in through our senses, and it's a neurological disordering of the information. So a siren goes off, and to one person, it's just a siren. To another person, it is so horribly loud and terrifying that they have a really negative response. And then there are people who don't even know what's going on. So right. That I hope that that's clear. And I really want people to understand that we probably all have sensory processing disorder to some degree.
Right. Because from what it sounds like, and I think this is like maybe a good way to think about it, is like anything else, it's a spectrum, right? Where you have like, sorry.
Yeah.
It's
great. Perfect segue.
Like perfectly managed sensory system right in the middle, right?
Right.
And then you have like a hypersensitive and hyposensitive.
Correct.
All in like the higher and lower end. So at any given moment, and probably depending on also the kinds of input that a child or a person is given and their level of tiredness and hunger as well, like those are all things that are going to influence, especially a young infant whose experiences this like sensorama world all the time.
Right.
And then say a toddler who is probably trying to manage emotions and all of the other sort of regulatory things. But I love sort of just to even break it down like further, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, but it sounds like, so for vestibular, a lot of people relate that to balance, right? So you were talking about the inner ear. That's where that sense of balance comes from, right? So we have a sense of balance for vestibular.
Right.
And just to recap, the vestibular sense for a hypersensitive child who has a lot of needs, and needs to engage in that sense more. You might have a child who is always spinning or needs to go on those sort of circular things.
Right. And I think for this purpose of this podcast, I think going into all of those specifics for each like hyper and hypo, it's a lot of information. And I wanted to say that I love that you brought up the spectrum. And I think that that's really awesome way of understanding it, and that we can have a mild reaction, a moderate reaction, and a severe reaction. And a severe reaction is when it truly interferes with your daily routine. Like your child is unable to put the clothes on and get out the door in an appropriate amount of time. That means that there is something going on there. So yes.
In and of itself is a spectrum.
Right.
Right.
And
Most toddlers have a hard time getting out the door.
yes. And that's when you would reach out to an OT.
Yeah.
Well, before I get to why you should want to work with an OT, I just want to say also with the spectrum, not only can it be mild, moderate, and severe, but it could also happen in one or all of those sensory systems. So you could have a really severe response to auditory stuff, but then you could have like your taste buds, like you could just very bland food or whatever. So it can really be all over the place. And that's what I think a lot of the frustration is with parents, is because they think they look at a checklist and they're like, they don't have everything. They don't need to have everything. It's truly about, is it impacting your life so incredibly that it's just so frustrating and you don't know what to do? And that's when you reach out to an OT, because we can help you sort through all of that, give you clear answers as to, is this truly sensory processing? Not only do we help with the sensory processing, but we're looking at gross motor milestones like crawling, sitting up, walking, running, jumping, your posture. We're looking at your fine motor skills, how you're playing with toys, how you're using crayons and markers with drawing and coloring, how you're using utensils at mealtime, how you're manipulating zippers, snaps, buttons, getting dressed, all of those kinds of things. So we really truly look at the whole child. And just like the word disorder, I want people to understand that occupational therapists are not synonymous with special needs children. We can really truly help anyone, whether you have a disability or not, because of our training and because of our knowledge and the resources we have. We can just answer your questions. If you're a parent, you probably have a lot of questions. And
guess what? That's why you're here today.
Right, exactly. So, it's always great to reach out. Like, why be like, oh, I wish I knew that then. Yeah, well, get them answered. Stop worrying. Like, you have enough to do as a parent. So
exactly.
Yes.
Thank you, Jill.
You're welcome.
So let's hear a little bit about what are some of the vital differences between a tantrum and a sensory meltdown? Because as we mentioned before briefly, sometimes we see that sort of those needs not being met, and that looks really can look really scary or really intense for a child from the outside.
Right. And I love what you just said, which is needs are not being met. And that is truly what a tantrum is. So really quickly, before I get into the differences of a tantrum and a sensory meltdown, I wanted to share that I'm also a parenting coach. And I've been working with my very good friend, Melissa Schwartz, who is a parenting coach for highly sensitive children. And we are in the final stages of our book, which is going to be released this spring. And it's called Under the Hood, the Inner Workings of Children. And what we do is we talk about the differences and similarities between high sensitivity, sensory processing disorder. And then we talk about these kinds of things like, how do you know my child's having a tantrum and a meltdown and all of that? And really briefly, high sensitivity is a genetic trait in 20% of the population. It's been studied in all different species, even animals. And sensory processing, like I said earlier, is a neurological disordering of information. So that word sensitivity and sensory kind of get confused. And again, we're trying to make it clear for parents and anyone working with children, when you should see certain things like this. And there can be an overlap. Your kid could have both of those things. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to talk about the real information. So a tantrum is what you said. It's a learned behavior as a result of built up stress. And a sensory meltdown is a neurological response to something that's happening. Tantrums can, in a way, be stopped, even when they're in that like in the middle of Target having their meltdown. But with sensory meltdowns, this could go on for a really long period of time. And we might not be able to control the environment and what's going on, or even figure out what that trigger was until maybe several days later as to why that happened. So first, let's talk a little bit more about tantrums. So we have manipulative tantrums that usually start off pretty innocently, and and most of the time we're unconsciously contributing to this tantrum. And it can be because we're probably being inconsistent with our rules, routines, and boundaries. So the example I love giving here is you have a rule in your house about not jumping on the couch. And the kid keeps standing up and you're like, listen, the rule is we're not jumping on the couch. And they get up and up and up. And after the 10th time, you're finally like, all right, fine, jump on the couch. And then you go through this all the time. But if you're not standing firm on what you want your rules, routines, and boundaries to be, this can happen a lot. And kids know how to poke at us and act like that. So, they'll say no to us, or they'll whine, or they'll say, why can't I jump on the couch? So we really want to make sure that we're being consistent and that their wants and needs are being met consistently throughout the day.
Well, and also I think just to add to that, it is also their job as toddlers to test whether or not there is a rule that is consistent across all people, settings, contexts, environments, all of those things. So if the rule in the house is not to jump on the couch, and they're going to try and figure that out with mom or with dad,
right,
in the morning or in the afternoon. And maybe I could, if I can't jump on the couch, maybe I can jump on this chair, right? So they're trying to figure out the rules of the world, right? That is what they're supposed to be doing. It's infuriating and it makes us crazy, but it is also developmentally appropriate.
Absolutely. And that's what I was just going to say. It's very common for toddlers, even into those like kindergarten, early elementary years, to do this, to figure out what's going on. That's an awesome point. The other tantrum is a stress tantrum. So it might seem like these tantrums also come out of nowhere, but it can be built up, changes in life, right? New baby, moving, starting a new school, you having a stressful day at work, constantly bringing that home, like we experience stress tantrums as adults. I think even though we might not, yell and kick and scream on the floor, we sometimes kind of lose it, and we have a hard time regulating. So some of the best ways to help kids going through stress tantrums is to kind of tune in to what is going on and kind of figure out what maybe some of those signs would be before they get to that point. It's a little bit different than those manipulative. You're approaching it from a different perspective than a manipulative tantrum. So those are the two, I think, major tantrum areas.
Sure.
And do you have any other questions or comments about that? Because I'm going to move on to the sensory meltdown.
I think that's pretty clear. I mean, I think the manipulative is the sort of testing behavior, and then the stress is more, it's because they're experiencing something that is enhancing or making them more, I guess you could say, sensitive to something that's happening.
And I think a lot of times it's hard if you have multiple children, or, like when you're having a new baby and they're like, but the older one didn't do that, or this didn't happen with them. And that's hard because you got to parent in a different way for all of your kids, because they have something called temperament, which is like your hardwiring, and it's something you're born with. So you could have a really like chill kid first time, and then you can have a kid who's off the freaking wall the second time.
Yep.
And what one situation might send one of them into a tantrum, the other one's going to look at the one on the floor and be like, why are you so upset about this? So could be very challenging. So now sensory meltdowns, and I like saying sensory meltdowns together, not just meltdowns, because it is because of a sensory overload experience. And again, just like we talked about with the spectrums, and just like we mentioned with the kids being different, there can be different tipping points for these kids. And what that means is their central nervous system has been overwhelmed by something, and it's misinterpreted in their body. So it could be that the lights are humming, the fluorescent lights are humming.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a fire alarm went off in the store. It could be that the store is super crowded. It could be there's a smell in the restaurant. Sometimes I think a lot of parents of sensory kids try to really think about these things.
Yes.
And go into proper environments, but you don't live in a bubble, and it can't always be controlled. So this is what can happen sometimes. I think with the sensory meltdowns, the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown is with tantrums, there's a point where you can kind of go in there as an adult and work through it and give some comfort in trying to get through this and kind of rationalize with the kid and go through that. With the sensory meltdown,
or even just like acknowledge that it's happening.
Exactly.
Enough, but
yes, but with a sensory meltdown, that sometimes and most times seems like that's not possible in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
By letting the child kind of go through it, we have to wait to intervene because we might actually cause more stress in that moment, I think, by coming in there than just waiting until we see signs of calm behavior to kind of process that. So I think that that's also a big difference between the two things that we see. I love what you said too about with a tantrum, even just sitting next to your child who might be crying and just hugging them and loving them, they could feel that too. Sometimes with a sensory meltdown, you really want to be safe. You may not want to get near your kid. They might be very, very upset, and we don't want you or them or anyone else to get hurt in that moment because it can be just so overwhelming for them. Yeah. So again, we just want to kind of wait. So I think that kind of leads into maybe we're coming into this holiday time, and a lot of times I think a lot of times it's stressful for everyone, regardless of where you are on that spectrum. Lots of holiday time, lots of food, lots of changes in schedule, all of that.
I'm hoping that these tips can probably apply to the grown-up.
I think everyone can, benefit from some of these tips. So Leah, let's talk about some of those things. So so I send out a weekly newsletter, and I basically always do 5 tips for whatever topic it is. And in this one, I'm going to provide you with 5 tips to maintain your sanity during the holidays. Yay. Yay. So I think the first one truly is our self-regulation, adult self-regulation. If you're overwhelmed, if you're stressed out, if you're feeling not yourself, your kids are going to pick up on that, and they're going to be a mess because you're the model. You're the one who's energetically, physically, all of that, showing them how they should be getting through this time. So I know it's really hard, but really being that good self model, even if you do things like check in and be like, I need to take a deep breath right now. Let's just all take a deep breath right now. Even it's okay for you to leave the room and take a break. That's a great strategy that you will teach your kids is, how to self-regulate and how to calm down appropriately.
That acknowledgement of everyone needs this. Yeah.
Yes. And I think,
I tend to use the phrase, I think I need to hit the reset button.
Yes, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I know that there's strategy out there where it's like red, yellow, green, blue, colors. It work really well, especially for those younger kids, because we tend to associate red with like stopping, like something's gonna, happen. Yellow is like, I'm kind of getting there. I'm feeling like I'm gonna freak out a little bit. Green is like thumbs up, good to go. And blue is kind of like tired, lethargic. So, there's lots of different strategies out there, and you can even say it too. You can be like, I feel green this morning. I'm ready to go. So I think, again, that first one, adult regulation, is really, really important. The second one is for those kids who do have sensory processing disorder. A lot of times their occupational therapist will provide them with a sensory diet. And Really briefly, a sensory diet is a set of activities that a child should be doing throughout the day to help them maintain what we call an optimal level of functioning. So truly, this can work for any child. So parents are already amazing. You're doing so many activities with your kids, but you're not thinking about like the sense behind the scenes sensory things that are going on. But if you have this great, like in the morning, we're going to go to the playground for 30 minutes and then we're going to come home and, just not overwhelmingly, but providing the nice balance of some movement activities, some activities like Play-Doh or shaving cream or sensory bins, those kinds of things,
That tactile stuff.
Tactile stuff, that would be incredible. And really kind of providing them with a way to satiate their self-regulation skills. There's plenty of examples online. And if you do work with an OT, definitely talk about it. And it's a living, breathing thing. Like we're not always the same person. What will work one day won't work the other day. So it's nice to have a bag of tricks and some backups and some activities to try to say like, I noticed this behavior is happening a lot at the same time, but this isn't working. Maybe I need something else to kind of fill it in.
That's great.
Yeah. The third one is I would really encourage all of us to kind of watch our diet during this time. It's obviously a season for lots of snacks and overeating and all of that kind of stuff. But yep, sugar. And there's so much research out there that tells us that sugar and dyes and all of that kind of stuff really impacts our bodies and these little bodies, so hard. And there is a brain-body connection. So what our gut experiences, our brain experiences. And, we always go with, oh, now they're going to be all crazy after sugar. Yeah, they are, because they're digesting it and it's connected. So, let them have the treats, but watch the amount that they're having. Don't, you don't have to take it away, but just in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
Yeah. The fourth one is because a lot of these kids may be out of school. I know from working in the schools that lots of the classrooms now have a visual schedule up on the board. So the kids start to really get routinized and understand that I come in, I put my backpack away, I wash my hands, I go to circle, we have snack, all of those kinds of things. And it's there because after a while we start talking and it's like blah, 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 whatever. So especially because some of these kids might be out of school, you may want to create a visual schedule at home. That can kind of remind them, and they might even be excited because they're so used to what it's going to be. So not that every day of your holiday has to be the same, but just let them know that, okay, we're going to wake up, we're going to have breakfast, we're going to go on a play date with Joe, then we're going to come home, whatever, and however you want it to look. Or we're getting on an airplane, we're going to Florida, all of that kind of stuff. And it could be on
for transitions and things that are less familiar or less regular even.
Yes.
In an unfamiliar environment to give some stability, to give some routine, because we all know that those daily routines, those caregiving routines, those play routines are what help to regulate both ourselves and our children and help them to anticipate what's coming next and deal with transitions. So that's so important, I think, Jill, because when we are out of that, it becomes naturally dysregulating for all of us. It's
absolutely.
We don't know where our bodies or our brains are supposed to be. And we have lots of different kinds of input from, family and everything. So excellent point.
Yes. And, there's lots of ways that you can do this. You can use a dry erase board, one of those small ones, and take it with you. You can probably find apps on your phone or, find pictures and print those out. Also, keep in mind how old your kid is and how much they can truly handle in relation to that schedule. So for some kids, it needs to be within that activity. So meaning like we're going to get up, brush our teeth, get dressed. That's all you're telling them. And then you're going to tell them the next chunk of what's going on. For older kids, you could probably put the whole day down and be like, let's check it off as it happens. We're doing our morning routine. We're going to the play date. We're going to take a nap, and then they just know what's expected. And I think we would see a lot less tantrums if kids kind of knew what was coming. And like you said, just had some more stability within a really outrageous time. The last,
I think, honestly, sorry, just to reiterate, like this is really important, even for an infant, say a 9, 10, 11-month-old. We don't think sometimes about how, because they can't tell us with words, how outside of themselves things are happening. But it's so important. We can just say those things. And like you said, just, okay, look, we're at grandma's house tonight, but we're going to wake up and we're going to do this and that, and let's do it. Yeah. And when you just put words to what you're doing, or sing a song about it, or whatever it is, or look at a picture of where we're going, so helpful.
So helpful. And with that said, with the word part, I love encouraging parents to read books about anything that's coming up about change. So reading books about holidays or going on vacation or anything that's going to be happening. It's so helpful for you as an adult because then you have a reference. So again, we talk, and they're like, whatever. And you can be like, remember in the story when Bobby went to his grandma's house, how did he feel? So you have more tools as a parent to help your kid through something that's new or unexpected and those kinds of feelings.
Totally.
Yeah. So the last one I want to share is to kind of say no to crowds, large groups, those kinds of things that might be truly overwhelming. Even if you go over to a family's house and kind of going back to the infant, passing around the baby, who's holding the baby, like those kinds of sensory information could really start to amp up a little baby. You might, see crying and just not okay, falling asleep, whatever. So know your kid.
And back to that is that hyper and hypo, right? Crying, it's too much, or just shutting down, falling asleep.
Right. Exactly.
Opposite sides of that sensory spectrum. That child is either experiencing way too much and is crying, or is experiencing way too much and is shutting down.
Exactly. So I know for me, I can handle family for a couple of hours and then I truly need to be by myself. I need a glass of wine. I need some TV. I need to have some downtime. And I think we truly need to attune to our children in that way. We need to notice when things are starting to fall apart, or let me recheck. We need to know before they start doing that it's time to go, because in that moment when they're melting down, it doesn't serve anyone. So just to be mindful.
That's great, Jill. Yeah. Great. All 5 of those are great tips. Great. All right. So we are going to take just a very quick break to hear a word from our sponsors, and then we'll hear more about some of your favorite resources. That would be great.
Okay.
Do you want to provide an enriching environment without all the plastic bells and whistles? Do you want to know how to stimulate your infant or toddler's growth and development? Are you tired of trying to do this all in a vacuum? We were not meant to parent in isolation. That is why I created the Strength in Words Community Lab, a content and community hub that brings you peace of mind that you have what matters when you need it most. Bite-sized morsels of developmental information, activity ideas to apply right now, parent support groups grouped by your child's age, developmental music classes, and unprecedented access to professionals and special guests like the one we have today, as well as an active, engaged community of others like you. The Community Lab is an all-in-one resource that is not one-size-fits-all. To take your free one-week trial and join us for everything I've just described, as well as member access to Q&A sessions with the featured guests I bring onto the podcast, come check out community.strengthinwords.com. Okay, Jill, what are some of your other favorite resources for parents who are interested in maybe learning more about sensory development, sensory processing? You mentioned your upcoming book, and I can't wait to link to that.
Yes.
We have that.
So yeah, so that is SPSD Kids is the company, and then the book is Under the Hood, the Manual to the Inner Workings of Children, and that will be released in early spring of 2018. Awesome. And there'll be a link on my website. So great resources, honestot.com. Sign up for a weekly newsletter. We go all over the board as far as topics. I love having guest bloggers. I've had quite a few speech therapists. I have chiropractors, massage therapists, anyone in the community that can really help to foster child development, I'm in. Some of the other resources here in Denver is the STAR Center, which is a world-renowned resource for sensory processing disorder. Lucy Jane Miller founded it, and she is one of the most amazing women, just does so much research and support for families all over the world. So you can check out that website. There's some great books out there that kind of talk about sensory processing. The Out of Sync Child by Carol Kranowitz is a good one. The Sensory Smart Child by Lindsay Beal is another good resource. It really just depends what kind of learner you are. I can't say that there's any good videos that kind of break it down. You know, it's a tricky topic, and it can get easily overwhelming because I think of that science-based stuff. So trying to make it fun and exciting can be a little bit tricky.
Well, I think we've done a pretty decent job.
I think we did too.
So thanks so much, Jill. And thanks to all of our community lab members who are listening here live. We are going to continue the discussion and open up for a Q&A session so that if we haven't done a full job, we can continue on. And so we'll do that in just a minute. And for everyone listening from home or on the go, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.